The road to Frosthaven was never meant to be traveled in the dark, especially not on the night of the Crimson Sickle Moon. Most humans had enough sense to lock their doors, draw their curtains, and hide from the ancient, predatory light that washed the mountain forests in a hue like spilled wine. Lyra Bishop, however, had run out of sense miles ago. All she had left was desperation, a dying car engine, and the absolute certainty that anything behind her was worse than anything that could be waiting ahead. Her headlights carved two trembling tunnels through the unnatural crimson gloom, illuminating flurries of snow that fell like ash. The pines here weren't just tall, they were watchful, pressing in on the narrow road as if trying to swallow it whole. The silence was wrong. No crickets, no distant owls, just the groan of her struggling sedan, and the howl of a wind that seemed to carry whispers just below the threshold of hearing. She'd seen the sign for Frosthaven 20 minutes ago, a wooden plank etched with fading letters, but the promised town was a ghost, swallowed by the jagged teeth of the mountains. A searing, sudden pain lanced through her temple. Lyra gasped, her knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. It wasn't a headache. It was a pull, a deep, visceral, magnetic yanking sensation behind her navel, tugging her not toward the unseen town, but to the left, into the absolute blackness between the trees. It felt like an invisible hook had been set deep in her core. "No," she whispered to the empty car, her voice trembling. "Just the road. Follow the road." The car, as if arguing, sputtered violently. The dashboard lights flickered, died, and with a final metallic sigh, the engine went still. The vehicle rolled to a silent halt, stranded in a small clearing where the crimson moonlight fell unfiltered. The sudden quiet was deafening. Lyra sat there, listening to the frantic drum of her own heart. The pull intensified, throbbing in time with her pulse. It was accompanied now by a feverish heat that spread through her veins, a stark contrast to the icy air seeping into the car. This was more than car trouble. This was a wrongness that went into the bone. Something in that blood-red light was speaking to something in her. Getting out was a terrible idea. Staying in a metal coffin on this abandoned road as night deepened was a worse one. With a shaking hand, she shouldered her backpack, the one containing everything she had left, and pushed the door open. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but the mountain air was shockingly pure, sharp with the scent of pine and frozen earth. And something else, something wild, musky, and fundamentally alive. The pull became a command, her feet, moving almost of their own volition, crunched through the thin layer of snow, carrying her away from the road, toward the tree line. Every rational thought screamed at her to stop, to build a fire, to wait for dawn. But her blood was singing a different, older song. The dense forest canopy blocked most of the red moonlight, plunging her into a world of deep shadows and strange, dappled crimson patterns. She walked for what felt like hours, yet the peak of the mountain never seemed closer. The silence was now absolute, a pressing weight on her eardrums. Then the world changed. The trees thinned abruptly, and she stumbled into a second larger clearing. And there, standing on a massive, weathered granite outcrop under the full, glaring eye of the Crimson Sickle Moon, was a wolf. It was not just an animal. It was a creature of myth and nightmare, carved from shadow and silver-tipped moonlight. It stood nearly as tall as her waist, its fur a tapestry of grays and blacks that seemed to drink the red light and radiate a cool, blue-silver glow of its own. Its eyes were not the eyes of a beast. They were ancient, intelligent, and burned with a molten gold fury that pinned her where she stood. Lyra's breath froze in her lungs. The pull in her core became a frenzied, vibrating wire strung tight between her and the colossal wolf. This was the source. This magnificent, terrifying creature was the magnet, and she was made of helpless iron. The wolf's muzzle wrinkled, revealing long, gleaming teeth. A low, rumbling growl began in its chest, a sound that vibrated through the frozen ground and up into the soles of her boots. It was a sound of warning, of possession, of utter domination. But beneath the terror, a madness rose in Lyra, a defiance born of a week of running, of losing everything. She was tired of being afraid. She took one shaky step backward. the wolf's growl escalated into a thunderous snarl. It took one graceful, predatory step down from the rock, its gaze never leaving hers. The message was clear. You do not leave. You are mine. Panic finally overrode the strange pull. Lyra turned to run. A howl tore through the night. It was not the sound of one wolf. It was a chorus, a symphony of savage voices rising from every direction in the forest, answering the call of their king. The sound lifted the hairs on her arms and neck. It was beautiful and horrifying, and it meant she was surrounded. She was prey, and the hunt was on. Lyra ran. Branches whipped at her face, roots sought to trip her. The howls echoed closer now, to the left, to the right, behind her. They were herding her. She burst into another small clearing, her lungs burning, and skidded to a halt. Before her stood a massive wrought iron gate, archaic and overgrown with vines, set into a high stone wall. Beyond it, at the end of a long, sweeping drive, loomed the dark, angular silhouette of a manor house, a lighthouse in a sea of predatory trees. Without a second thought, she threw herself at the gate, finding a small side door unlocked. She slipped through, slamming it shut behind her just as a sleek, gray form crashed against the iron bars on the other side. She was in. But as she stumbled up the gravel drive toward the darkened house, the feeling of safety evaporated. The pull in her core had not lessened. It had twisted. It was no longer just a pull toward the wolf. It was a pull toward this place. The mansion was not a refuge. It was the heart of magnetism. The wolf on the mountain owned the forest. Whatever lived in this stark, silent house owned everything else. A light flickered on in a high window, a single golden eye in the face of the stone giant. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the light, looking down at her. Not a wolf, a man. The pull in her soul spasmed, a painful, joyous, terrified recognition. The hunt outside was over. Something far more complicated had just begun. The howls outside the gate had fallen silent. The only sound was the wind and the frantic beat of her heart against her ribs. She was inside the cage. She had just met the keeper, and the Crimson Sickle Moon was only now reaching its zenith. The gravel of the drive felt like shattered bones beneath Lyra's boots, each step echoing too loudly in the vault of silence that had fallen. The howls had ceased the moment the figure appeared in the window. That was more terrifying than the noise. The mansion loomed, a monolith of shadow and sharp angles against the bruised, red-tinged sky. The single-lit window was a beacon, but it felt less like safety and more like the lure of an anglerfish, a promise of light in an abyss that would consume her. Every instinct screamed to run back to the forest, to take her chances with the wolves. But the magnetic hook in her core had solidified into a chain. It was rooted here, in the stone and mortar of this place, tethered to the silhouette in the light. She was caught between the pack outside the walls and the sovereign within them. The front door was a massive slab of darkened oak, banded with iron. Before she could decide to knock or flee, it swung inward without a sound. No one stood in the entryway. The hall beyond was a cavern of darkness, smelling of old wood, frost, and a sharp, clean scent like alpine air after a lightning strike. Lyra crossed the threshold, and the door sealed shut behind her with a soft, final thud. The only illumination came from a grand staircase ahead, where pale moonlight filtered through a high, arched window and the distant glow from the room upstairs. "Hello?" Her voice was a dry crackle, swallowed by the stillness. A floorboard creaked directly above her. A presence, heavy and deliberate, moved across the ceiling. He was coming down. Lyra's breath hitched. She stood frozen in the moonlit stripe, a specimen pinned for examination. Footsteps, measured and unnervingly quiet, descended the stairs. He emerged from the shadows not as a man, but as an extension of the gloom itself. Caius. His name invaded her mind before she saw his face clearly. It wasn't a thought. It was a cold, hard fact deposited into her consciousness, like a stone dropped into still water. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, placing him just above her eye level. The faint light sculpted a face that was all harsh, unforgiving lines, a sharp jaw clenched tight, a blade-straight nose, lips set in a thin, severe line. His hair was the color of a raven wing, swept back, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same molten gold as the wolf's on the mountain, but where the beasts held wild fury, Caius's held a frozen, calculating rage. He looked at her not as a person, but as a problem. A dangerous, malfunctioning thing that had washed up on his shore. For a long moment, he simply stared. The silence was a physical pressure. Lyra found her voice, a thin thread of defiance. My car broke down. The wolves, you were drawn. His voice was not what she expected. It wasn't a growl, but a low, resonant baritone, cool and smooth as polished riverstone. It was the voice of absolute authority, used to being obeyed. It made the feverish pull in her belly tighten. "I don't know what you mean," she lied, the words tasting like ash. His gaze bored into her. "The Crimson Sickle. It calls to what is ours. It should not be called a human." He took the final steps down, and his presence seemed to fill the entire hall. He was taller, broader than she had realized, moving with a predator's latent grace. "What are you?" "A lost woman with a dead car," she shot back, hugging her arms around herself. A flicker of something, impatience, disgust, crossed his face. A lie. He closed the distance between them in one swift stride. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from him and smell that alpine lightning scent more intensely. It made her head swim. "You feel it. The tether. You have since the moon rose." Lyra's resolve crumbled. She gave one sharp, helpless nod. His golden eyes flashed. "Then this is a catastrophe." He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "I have spent a century ensuring my territory was clean, pure, free of complications, vermin." The word was a lash. "And you wander in on the one night that could forge a bond neither of us wants." "Bond?" The word escaped her, small and terrified. Before he could answer, a new, more violent sensation ripped through her mind. It wasn't a sound, but the concept of sound. A roaring, white-hot wave of "get out." Lyra cried out, staggering back as if struck. The voice was his, but it wasn't in her ears. It was inside her skull, etched directly onto her neurons. It carried not just words, but a torrent of accompanying emotion, blistering anger, a profound sense of violation, and beneath it, a pulse of raw, unadulterated fear. "You see?" The voice came again, slightly quieter, but no less intense. "This abomination, a human mind, fragile and open, inside my own, a back door into my thoughts, my territory, my pack. You are a flaw, a vulnerability I cannot afford." Lyra clutched her head. "Stop it. Get out of my head." "I cannot." The mental projection was a snarl. "That is the curse of it. The moon has decided we are linked. A mistake it will soon regret. You will stay here. You will touch nothing, speak to no one, and you will pray for this connection." Fades with the moon. The voice in her mind withdrew, leaving a chilling, silent vacuum. In the physical world, Caius had not moved. He stared at her, his expression granite. The mental invasion had lasted seconds. It felt like an eternity. "You heard me," he stated flatly. "I felt you," she whispered, her voice raw. The violation was complete. Her body was in his house. Her mind was no longer solely her own. "Consider this your prison, then," he said, his tone chillingly pragmatic. "The forest would kill you before dawn. The wolves are the least of what hunts in the Crimson Sickle's light. Here, you are merely a contained infection. I will find a way to serve this, and then you will leave." He gestured to a shadowed corridor off the main hall. "There is a room. It has a lock, on the outside." With that, he turned and walked back up the stairs, leaving her standing alone in the silver and crimson moonlight. the ghost of his fury echoing in the silent chambers of her mind. The chain in her soul was now a cage, and her jailer could speak to her without ever making a sound. The room was not a cell, and that made it worse. It was a guest room, or had been once. Faded elegance clung to it like dust. A four-poster bed with a torn canopy, a wardrobe with a cracked mirror, a writing desk scarred by time. A single guttered candle provided the only light, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to watch her. The lock turning on the other side of the door had been a soft, final sound. A period at the end of Caius's sentence. Lyra stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The feverish pull in her core had settled into a low, constant hum, a tuning fork vibrating at a frequency only she could hear, tuned to the man now moving somewhere in the house above her. She could feel his presence, a cold, dark star exerting its gravitational pull. And the silence in her mind was now a void she feared would suddenly fill again with that furious, invasive voice. Hours bled together, marked only by the slow crawl of the crimson moonlight across the floor. Exhaustion eventually overpowered adrenaline, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling with a deep cellular fatigue. She must have dozed, because the sound that woke her was not outside, but inside the room. A gentle, rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch at the door. Not the handle, not a knock, claws. Lyra sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound stopped. A low, inquisitive whine filtered through the heavy wood. It was a canine sound, but softer, younger than the monstrous howls of the forest. Before she could react, she heard a different sound, a sharp, clear mental command that was not directed at her, but which she overheard like a shout in a distant room. Alder, back. The whining stopped instantly. A faint scrabble of paws on hallway stone receded. The mental voice had been Caius's, but different. Less furious, more authoritative. The protector of his pack, even from a curious member of it. He was everywhere. In the walls, in the air, in the silence of her own skull. Just before dawn, when the red light had bled into a grim gray, the lock turned again. The door opened, and a woman stood there. She was older, her hair a sleek silver braid over one shoulder, her eyes a kind, earthy brown that held no trace of animal gold. She carried a simple tray with a steaming bowl and a hunk of bread. "I am Celine," she said, her voice warm like sun-warmed stone. "The pack's healer. He asked me to look at you." "To see if I'm broken?" Lyra asked, the words coming out hoarse. Celine's smile was small and sad. "To see what the moon has sent us." She placed the tray on the desk and gestured for Lyra to sit. Her examination was not clinical, but deeply peculiar. She did not use a stethoscope. She held her palms an inch above Lyra's skin, over her heart, her forehead, the base of her throat, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Your energy, it is not a shifter's," Celine murmured, more to herself than to Lyra. "There is no second form coiled within you, no beast. But it is not entirely human either. It is receptive, like still water waiting for the moon's reflection, or a lens waiting to focus light." Lyra remained still, a specimen under a microscope. "He called me vermin." "Caius," Celine sighed, the name holding both respect and a deep, old sorrow, "fears what he does not understand. And you, child, are an equation he cannot solve. The Crimson Sickle Moon triggers the fated bond in our kind. It is a sacred, brutal thing. For an alpha's bond to manifest with a human, it is unprecedented. It suggests you are not what you seem." "I seem like a graphic designer from Portland who made a series of terrible life decisions," Lyra said flatly. Celine almost laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are a seed, and the bond is the first drop of rain. We shall see what grows." Her hands paused over Lyra's abdomen, where the pull was strongest. Celine's gentle expression suddenly tightened. She pulled back as if touched by a live wire. "What is it?" Lyra asked, alarm spiking. "The bond. It is already deepening. Celine whispered, her eyes wide. "It is not just a thread between minds. It is beginning to root in your life force. This is too fast. This is—" She stood abruptly, gathering her skirts. "You must eat. Rest. Do not try to leave this room." "Why? What did you feel?" Celine paused at the door, her kind face etched with a new worry. "I felt a shadow, Lyra. Not yours. Hi. A wound on his soul, deep and old, that this new bond is touching. And a wound like that, when poked, can make even the most controlled alpha lash out." She left, and the lock clicked once more. Lyra stared at the closed door, Celine's words sinking in. She was a lens, a seed, touching a wound. The bowl of soup steamed, forgotten. The hum in her core was changing, maturing. It wasn't just attraction or fear now. It was a fragile, terrifying sense of connection. And with it came the first, faint, ghostly echo of something that was not her own emotion. A hollow, aching darkness that felt like grief so profound it had become a glacier in the soul. Caius's grief. He was not just angry. He was in pain. And somehow this bond, this catastrophe, was stirring it all up. The gray dawn light finally broke, bleaching the last of the crimson from the sky. The Crimson Sickle Moon had set. The pull remained, the prison was held, and in the quiet of the locked room, Lyra Bishop, the human graphic designer, felt the first true, unsettling ripple of a power she did not understand, the power to feel a monster's heartache. The hollow echo of Caius's grief that had seeped through the bond lingered in Lyra's chest like a swallowed stone. It was a cold, heavy thing, so different from the fiery anger he projected. It made him real in a way his golden-eyed glare or the mental command of "get out" never could. A monster with a bleeding heart was infinitely more dangerous than a simple beast. Celine did not return. The tray was taken by an unseen hand while Lyra slept fitfully at the desk. The food was plain, nourishing, fuel for a prisoner. The daylight outside the window was a flat, wintry gray, leaching the world of color and depth. It made the opulent decay of the room feel even more like a forgotten tomb. Just as the silence threatened to become a sound of its own, a new presence announced itself. Not with a scratch or a whisper, but with a scent. Old books, pine resin, and a subtle, sharp tension. A shadow filled the locked door's small barred window, then stepped back. "Stand away from the door," a male voice instructed. It was younger than Caius's, lighter, but threaded with its own kind of steel. Not an alpha's command, but a beta's firm order. Lyra retreated to the center of the room. The lock turned, and the man entered. He was tall, with tousled, sand-colored hair and eyes of a shifting, storm-gray hue. He held himself with the ready posture of a soldier, but his gaze as he looked at her was not hostile. It was deeply, profoundly curious, and etched with pity. "I'm Kalen," he said, closing the door but not locking it. "The Pack Beta." "Sent to interrogate the vermin?" Lyra asked, her own voice weary. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sent to assess the anomaly. And, if I'm being honest, to satisfy my own catastrophic curiosity." He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "He can't hear us right now. He's on the eastern ridge, pushing himself and the patrol to exhaustion. It's what he does when he wants to outrun his own head. And what's in his head?" The question left her before she could stop it. Kalen studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth to commit. "Pain," he said simply, "and a story you need to hear, for your own survival. Because he will not be the one to tell you, and without understanding you will do the wrong thing, and he will break you for it." He gestured to the two chairs by the cold fireplace. A silent offer. After a heartbeat, Lyra sat. Kalen took the other, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Caius wasn't born to this rank," Kalen began, his voice dropping into the register of a secret told in the dark. "He earned it, in blood and ash, 70 years ago. The pack was weaker then, led by a corrupt alpha named Varek. Caius was his best enforcer, his sharpest blade. and he had a mate, Anya. Hearing the old, cherished name in this dusty room sent an inexplicable shiver down Lyra's spine. She was fierce, brilliant, a true Luna. She saw the rot in Varric that others ignored. She and Caius planned to challenge him, to take the pack and cleanse it. But on the night of the challenge moon, Varric revealed his true cunning. Caelin's stormy eyes grew distant. He had a witch in his employ. When Caius stepped onto the challenge grounds, he didn't face Varric, he faced Anya. Lyra's breath caught. What? The witch had twisted her perception, used a glamour. Anya saw Caius as Varric, and Caius for one fatal second did not recognize his own mate's mind behind the enemy's face. He thought Varric had stolen her form. He struck to disarm, to subdue, but the spell made her clumsy. His blow was not fatal, but it was enough to make her fall, to crack her head on the ritual stone. Caelin's voice was flat, hollow. She died in his arms, her eyes clearing only at the last second. She saw him. She knew it was him. And she smiled, as if to forgive him, before the light left her. A nausea that had nothing to do with food rolled through Lyra. The hollow grief in her chest now had a shape, a name, and a face of unbearable tragedy. Caius went mad, Caelin continued. True, world-ending rage. He tore Varric and the witch apart with his bare hands. He claimed the alpha rank that night not through ceremony, but through annihilation. He has held it with an iron fist ever since, protecting this pack from every external threat with a paranoia that borders on prophecy. He believes the world is a nest of traps and illusions, and he believes, Caelin said, locking eyes with Lyra, that the bond is the universe's ultimate trap, a beautiful divine trick designed to make you love the thing that will destroy you. He loved Anya, and his love killed her. The moon, in his mind, is not a goddess. It is a cruel jester, and you are its latest punchline. The pieces crashed together in Lyra's mind, the instant rage, the vermin, the desperate need to serve. She wasn't just an unwanted human. She was a trigger for a 70-year-old nightmare, a ghost summoned in living flesh. So I'm not a person to him, Lyra said, her voice barely audible. I'm a trick, a repeat of the past. You are a test, Caelin corrected softly. One he believes he will fail, with catastrophic consequences. Your bond is deepening, Celine says. It is touching that old wound. To him, that doesn't feel like a connection. It feels like the jaws of the trap resetting. He stood, the chair scraping softly. I've told you this so you will have context for his cruelty, so you might have a sliver of patience, and so you understand the most important rule. Do not, under any circumstances, push him toward affection. Do not try to be her. Do not try to heal him. In his mind, healing is just the prelude to a greater breaking. Your only hope is to be so utterly unlike anything from his past, so mundanely yourself, that the bond starves from lack of spark. He moved to the door, then paused. He's returning. The exhaustion never works, but he'll keep trying. His gray eyes held a final, serious warning. The forest holds many dangers, Lyra, but the most wounded animal in these woods is the one who just locked you in this room. Tread softly. Caelin slipped out, and the lock clicked again, a sound that now felt profoundly different. Lyra sat in the gathering dusk, the story wrapping around her like a shroud. Caius wasn't just her jailer, he was a fellow prisoner, serving a life sentence in a cage of his own grief and guilt. The bond between them wasn't just a chain, it was a bridge over a chasm of pain, and she was standing on it without knowing if the other side was holding or waiting to collapse beneath her. The story Caelin left behind was a poison and an antidote in one. Understanding Caius's past didn't make him less terrifying, but it made him tragically, unbearably specific. The hollow grief she'd felt now had a source. The bond wasn't just pulling her toward a monster, it was trying to tether her to a monument of sorrow. Night fell again, but the moon was a waning sliver, its crimson power diminished. The unnatural pull in Lyra's core had settled into a constant, low-grade awareness, like knowing the exact location of a storm cloud on the horizon. She could feel him, a brooding pressure at the edge of her consciousness, a dark sun around which she was now forced to orbit. She was staring at the patterns of frost on her window when the door unlocked for the third time. It wasn't Celine's gentle touch or Kaylin's firm turn. It was a sharp, impatient twist of the key. Caius stood in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. Shadows pooled under those burning gold eyes, and a fresh, thin scar marred the line of his cheekbone. The scent of cold air, pine, and a coppery hint of blood clung to him. He'd been fighting. "You will come with me," he said, his voice a rasp of gravel. It wasn't a request. It was the Alpha's will made sound. Lyra stood, her legs stiff. "Why?" "The bond is a conduit, a weakness. If I can sense you, so can others. The wards around this house are strong, but they are tuned to my energy. Yours is a foreign signal, a flare in the night. We must see how far it reaches, and what it might have already attracted." He turned and walked out, expecting obedience. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra followed. The mansion was even more imposing at night, a labyrinth of dark wood and colder stone. He led her not upstairs to the lit parts of the house, but down into the basement. It wasn't a cellar, it was a sanctum. The walls were lined not with wine racks, but with old, leather-bound tomes, strange artifacts of carved stone and twisted root, and shelves of luminescent fungi that cast a soft blue-green glow. In the center of the room was a large, circular disk of polished black obsidian, inlaid with silver runes that seemed to swim in the low light. "Stand there," he commanded, pointing to the center of the disk. Lyra's feet felt rooted to the stone floor. "What are you going to do?" "A scrying, to map the extent of this entanglement." His gaze was clinical, detached. "If we are fortunate, it is superficial. A scratch on the soul that will scar over and fade. And if we're not fortunate?" His jaw tightened. "Then it is a root, and roots must be torn out before they strangle the host tree." He gestured again, impatient. The center. Swallowing her fear, Lyra stepped onto the cold obsidian. The moment her feet touched the silver inlay, a jolt shot through her. Not pain, but a sudden, shocking amplification. The hum in her core became a resonant chord. She gasped, and across the room, Caius stiffened as if struck by lightning. His golden eyes flew to hers, wide with a shock that mirrored her own. "You feel that?" he breathed, the clinical mask slipping for a second. "It's louder," she managed. "It's not louder, it's clearer." He approached the disk cautiously, as if it were a live mine. The stone amplifies magical connections. This should not be possible for a human. He knelt at the edge of the disk, placing his palms flat on its surface. "Do not move, do not speak." He closed his eyes. The runes around Lyra's feet began to glow, a cool silver light that climbed like mist. It didn't touch her, but she felt it probing the edges of her being, tracing the invisible tether that connected her to the kneeling Alpha. In her mind's eye, she suddenly saw it, a cord of braided light and shadow stretching from her core to his. It was beautiful and horrifying, pulsing with a faint, dual rhythm, her own frantic heartbeat and the slower, deeper, agonized drum of his. Caius's eyes snapped open. They were blazing, not with anger, but with a kind of terrified awe. "It's already rooted," he whispered, the words raw. "In both of us. Not just a mental link, a life force link." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, rising to his feet, his voice hollow, "that if one of us dies, the other may not survive the severance. The moon didn't forge a chain, it forged a shared artery." He turned away, running both hands through his hair. "A perfect trap. Even my death would not free you. It would merely kill you more slowly." The horror of it sank into Lyra's bones. She was bound to this tormented stranger, not just by magic, but by literal survival. Her fate was tied to his rage, his grief, his wars. There must be a way to undo it, she pleaded, stepping off the disc. The amplified connection faded back to the persistent hum, but the knowledge of its depth remained. There are old ways, Caius said, his back still to her. Dangerous rites, bargains with forces worse than the moon. They require components, one of which grows only in the heart of the whispering wood, under the light of a new moon. He finally turned to face her. The vulnerability she'd glimpsed was gone, sealed behind a wall of grim resolve. Until then, you are a liability, my liability. You will remain here. You will learn to shield your mind, to quiet your end of this bond. If my enemies sense your fragility, they will target you to get to me, and I cannot afford to be weakened. So I'm to become a prisoner who learns silent suffering? For your convenience? For your survival, he roared, the sound echoing in the stone room. The force of his anger was a physical blow, and Lyra stumbled back a step. Immediately, a wave of sharp regret, not hers, flashed through the bond, followed by a surge of his self-loathing. He mastered himself with a visible shudder. You will begin tomorrow. Kaelin will teach you the basics of mental shielding. Do not fail at it. He strode toward the door, then paused without looking back. The room is yours. The lock will not be used again. The house itself is your cage now. Try to leave its grounds, and the words will not be gentle. And the wolves, he added, a dark promise in his tone, have been given their orders. He left her in the glowing, fungal light of the sanctum. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the bond thrum between them like a plucked string. A shared artery. A perfect trap. And her first lesson would be to learn how to mute her own soul's call. The cage had just become infinitely larger and infinitely more inescapable. The next morning, Kaelin found her in the manor's vast frost-rimmed library. He carried no books on shielding. Instead, he carried 2 cups of bitter, strong tea. Shielding isn't about building a wall, he began, handing her a cup. Walls can be broken. It's about learning to be quiet, to make your mental presence a still pond instead of a crashing wave. Right now, to him, you're a constant radio broadcast of fear, confusion, and frustration. Lyra took the tea, its heat seeping into her chilled fingers. And how do I become a pond? First, you have to find your center, the part of you that is you, separate from the bond, separate from the fear. He gestured for her to sit on a worn leather sofa. Close your eyes, breathe, and tell me, what is one thing you know to be true, right now, at this moment? Something simple. A fact. Lyra closed her eyes. The bond hummed. Caius's presence was a distant storm cloud, heavy with grim purpose. She pushed past it. My hands are warm from the cup. Good. Anchor there. The warmth. The weight of the ceramic. The scent of the tea. When you feel the bond pulling, or his emotions leaking through, return to that anchor. It's your tether to yourself. They practiced for an hour. It was exhausting. Every time she began to find a sliver of inner quiet, a spike of Caius's impatience or a ripple of his cold grief would breach her tentative calm. She felt like a child learning to walk on a ship in a storm. During a break, as they watched gray clouds scud past the library windows, Lyra asked the question that had been burning in her. Kaelin, the component for the unbinding ritual, the one in the whispering wood, what is it? Kaelin's easy demeanor tightened. It's called a tear of the moon. It's a silver flower that blooms only where a great tragedy has occurred, and only under the specific light of a new moon. It absorbs and holds sorrow. And there's one in the whispering wood? There is a place there, the shattered glen. It's where Anya died. He said the name quietly, reverently. Caius has never returned. The pack avoids it. The sorrow there is, fertile ground for such a thing to grow. Lyra's heart ached. To sever their bond, Caius would have to confront the heart of his own pain. It seemed a cruel symmetry. Do you think he'll actually do it? Go there? I think, Kaelin said, staring into his empty cup, He would walk into hellfire to be free of this bond, because to him it is hellfire in a different form. But going to the glen, it might break him in the process, and a broken alpha is a danger to everyone. The lesson resumed, but Lyra's focus was shattered. Her anchor, the warm cup, the feel of the leather, seemed trivial against the tides of tragedy swirling around her. Days bled into a week. The routine was rigid. Mornings with Kaelin, struggling with shields that felt like tissue paper against the gale of Caius's psyche. Afternoons alone, exploring the limited safe zones of the manor, the library, a sunroom filled with dead plants, her own room. Evenings, she would sense Caius's return from patrols, a wave of exhaustion and simmering violence that would wash over her before he brutally clamped it down. She never saw him at meals. Food appeared on a tray outside her door. The pack was a ghostly presence, a whisper in a hallway, a shadow in the garden, the occasional distant laughing howl that was playful, not predatory. She was a ghost among them. Her only consistent contact was Celine, who checked on her every few days, her kind eyes growing more worried each time. "The root is deepening, child," Celine murmured during one examination, her hands hovering over Lyra's heart. "It is seeking nutrients. It is beginning to share." Share what? Strength, senses, in flashes. Celine looked troubled. "Have you felt unusually strong? Heard things you should not be able to hear?" Lyra thought of the previous night, when she'd clearly heard a rabbit scuffling under the frost outside her window, 3 stories up. She'd written it off as imagination. She nodded silently. "It is the bond trying to equalize, to make you more compatible, to protect you by giving you a shifter's gifts." Celine sighed. "This is not a passive connection. It is alive, and it has its own purpose." That purpose became terrifyingly clear 2 nights later. Lyra was dreaming of running through Portland streets that twisted into mountain forests when the dream shattered. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in her shoulder, not her own pain, but his. It was accompanied by a flash of vision, snarling jaws, matted fur, the scent of rotting meat and magic. A feral wolf, huge and maddened, its eyes rolled back to show the whites, lunging. She woke with a scream, clutching her perfectly intact shoulder. The phantom pain was already fading, but the panic in the bond was not. It was Caius's panic, cold and sharp. He was fighting, he was hurt. Without thinking, driven by an instinct deeper than reason, she threw off the blankets and ran. She didn't head for the front door, knowing the wards would stop her. Instead, she ran to the sunroom, to the large casement window that led to a narrow balcony. The lock was old and rusted. She wrenched it open, the cold night air slapping her face. The bond was a screaming wire now, pulling her east, toward the forest, toward him. She climbed over the balcony railing, hung for a terrifying second, and dropped onto the frozen earth below. The impact jolted her ankles, but she felt no pain. His pain was still echoing through her, masking her own. She ran for the tree line, for the same wrought iron gate she'd entered through. As she reached it, a sleek gray wolf, Alder, she somehow knew, materialized from the shadows, blocking her path. He growled, a clear warning. "Let me go." She didn't shout it with her voice. She pushed it, with all her fear and desperation, down the bond. It wasn't a thought. It was a command fueled by the bond's own power. The young wolf whined, cowed, and backed away a single step. It was enough. Lyra fumbled with the small side door, flung it open, and plunged into the forest. She was defenseless, in a nightgown and bare feet, but the bond was her compass. It pulled her through brambles and over frozen streams, guiding her steps with an uncanny precision. She could smell the blood now, the rot, the ozone tang of spent magic. She could hear the snarls and snaps of a vicious fight. She burst into a small, rocky clearing. Caius, in human form, was a bloody mess. His shirt was torn to ribbons, revealing long, deep gashes across his chest and arm. Facing him was the feral wolf from her vision, twice the size of a normal wolf, its fur patchy, drool hanging from its jaws. It bled from multiple wounds, but it fought with mindless fury. Two other pack members in wolf form circled, harrying it, but it focused solely on Caius, on the Alpha. Caius saw her the moment she entered the clearing. His golden eyes, glowing with battle light, widened in pure, unadulterated horror. No! The distraction was fatal. The feral wolf lunged, aiming not for Caius but for the new, vulnerable target, for her. Time seemed to slow. Lyra saw the jaws open, saw the bloody teeth. She felt Caius's surge of desperate, catastrophic power. But she also felt something else rise within her, not fear, but a fierce, protective rage. This was her bond, this broken, grieving man, and this monster was going to take him from her, and in doing so, kill her too. She didn't think so. She acted. She threw her hands out, not to shield herself, but toward Caius. And she pushed not a command, but pure, raw energy down the bond. The strength Selene said was sharing. The connection was a shared artery. It felt like opening a floodgate. A torrent of power, her own latent energy, amplified by the bond and fueled by desperation, surged out of her and into him. Caius roared, a sound of shock and immense power. Light, actual, visible silver light, erupted from him. He moved faster than sight, intercepting the feral wolf mid-leap. His hand, now tipped with claws that gleamed like polished steel, closed around the beast's throat. There was a terrible, wet crack. Silence. The feral wolf collapsed, lifeless. The other two wolves shifted back into human forms, a man and a woman Lyra didn't recognize, staring in shock between their alpha and the human girl trembling in the snow. Caius was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. The silver light around him faded. The deep gashes on his chest were already knitting closed, healing at an impossible rate. He looked from his own healed wounds to his bloody hand, to Lyra. She stood there, her bare feet going numb in the snow, her nightgown torn by thorns, her body trembling with aftershock. The energy drain had left her hollow, dizzy. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides. She flinched, expecting fury. Instead, he stopped just before her, his glowing eyes scanning her face, her body, for injury. The bond between them was no longer a hum. It was a deafening, synchronized drum. His heart, her heart, beating as one. You, his voice was ragged, stripped bare. You channeled the bond. You gave me your strength. It was going to kill you, she whispered, her teeth chattering. And you would have died with me, he said. But the anger was gone, replaced by a dazed, bewildered awe. He saw her shiver violently. Without a word, he stripped off his torn, bloodied outer shirt, leaving him in a stained undershirt, and wrapped the heavy fabric around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and saturated with his scent, alpine lightning, blood, and power. The act was so simple, so profoundly intimate, that Lyra froze. The pack members behind them exchanged a silent, stunned look. You should not have come, he said, but the words were soft, almost gentle. You could have been killed. I felt you. I had to. It was the only truth that mattered. He stared at her for a long moment, the glacier in his eyes showing its first deep fissures. The bond thrummed with a new, confusing mixture of terror, gratitude, and something else. Something that felt like the first faint, reluctant echo of recognition. Come, he said finally, his voice rough. You're freezing. He didn't take her hand, but he didn't walk ahead either. He stayed beside her as they walked back toward FROSTHAVEN, the 2 pack members flanking them silently, the dead feral wolf left for others to clean up. The storm in his mind had quieted, replaced by a deep, turbulent thoughtfulness. Lyra, wrapped in his shirt, surrounded by his scent and his power, understood something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a prisoner, or a problem, or a trick of the moon. She had, for one blinding moment, become his equal, his partner, his Luna, and the terror in his heart now was not of the bond itself, but of what that might mean. The return to FROSTHAVEN was silent, but the silence was no longer empty. It was thick with unspoken realizations, vibrating with the aftershock of what had transpired in the clearing. Caius led her not to the sunroom balcony, but to the main front doors, which swung open at his approach. The wards, which should have repelled her, parted like water, accepting her presence wrapped in his scent, his energy. The pack members who had been with them melted into the shadows of the house. Caius guided Lyra, her legs now weak and trembling from cold and exhaustion, into a part of the manor she'd never seen, the West Wing. The air was warmer here, lived in. He opened a door to a sitting room dominated by a large fireplace where embers still glowed. Without a word, he guided her to a worn armchair close to the heat and knelt to stir the embers, adding wood with practiced efficiency. Flames leaped to life, painting his stark profile in gold and shadow. The fresh scars on his chest and arm, now just pink lines, gleamed in the firelight. He remained kneeling, staring into the fire, his back to her. The bond between them was a quiet, steady pulse, no longer screaming but profoundly present, like a shared heartbeat in the quiet room. "What you did," he began, his voice low and measured, "was reckless, idiotic, and likely saved my life." He turned his head slightly, his golden gaze catching the firelight. The feral was poisoned. Rage magic. Its wounds would not heal. Mine were not healing. I was weakening. He looked back at the fire, his shoulders tense. "You poured your own vitality into me. A human cannot do that, not without a conduit." "The bond," she said softly. "The bond," he confirmed, a note of grim wonder in his tone. "It is not just a tether or a curse. It is a circuit. And tonight you completed it, voluntarily." He finally turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Lyra pulled the blood-stained shirt tighter around her. "I told you. I felt you dying." "You should have been glad." The words burst from him, raw and pained. "It would have freed you." "It would have killed me," she shot back, a spark of her own anger igniting. "Or didn't you listen to your own explanation? Shared artery, Caius. Your death isn't my freedom, it's my execution. My survival is tied to yours. That's not a choice, it's a fact. And tonight, I chose to fight for it. For both of us." He flinched as if struck. The concept of a choice, of a fight for him, not against him, seemed to break something loose behind his eyes. The wall of frozen grief cracked further, revealing the raw, weary man beneath. "Anya," he said. The name of a sacred, broken thing in the firelight would have done the same. She was always rushing into danger, a force of nature. He didn't look at Lyra as he spoke, but at some memory in the flames. "I spent 70 years believing the bond was a weakness, that love was the flaw that got her killed, that the universe's greatest trick was making you need something it would inevitably take away." He stood up abruptly, pacing away from the fire, his silhouette a restless shadow. "And then you arrive, a human, an impossibility, carrying a bond I did not ask for and do not want. And on our first true test, you use that bond not as a chain to bind me, but as a weapon to save me. You acted like Luna." He stopped pacing and finally looked at her, his eyes blazing with conflicted fire. "But you are not a shifter. You are not her. You are a complication that defies every law of my world." Lyra stood, her legs still unsteady, but her resolve firming. "I'm not trying to be her, Caius. I'm just trying to be alive. And my being alive is, through this stupid magical accident, tied to you being alive. So yes, I saved you. I'd do it again. Not because of some destined love, but because I'm a graphic designer from Portland who really doesn't want to die tonight." A strange, choked sound escaped him. It took her a moment to realize it was a laugh. A bitter, ragged, but genuine laugh. He ran a hand over his face. "A graphic designer from Portland," he repeated, shaking his head. "The moon has a vicious sense of humor." The tension in the room shifted, softening at the edges. The bond hummed with a less frantic energy. "Kaelin told me," Lyra ventured cautiously, "about the tear of the moon, about the shattered glen." All softness vanished. His expression shuddered. That is my path to take. Alone. If the bond is a circuit, she pressed, if we're sharing strength, senses, maybe even wounds, is it wise for you to go alone to the place of your greatest pain? What if it overwhelms you? What if it overwhelms me through the bond? He hadn't considered that. She saw the realization hit him. His aloneness was no longer a guarantee. His pain could become hers. His collapse could trigger her own. You are suggesting you accompany me. It was not a question. It was a statement of profound disbelief. I'm suggesting that this bond makes you and me functionally obsolete in some situations. This might be one of them. If the ritual requires a component born of your sorrow, and my presence is now intertwined with your energy, maybe I'm part of the equation now, whether we like it or not. He was silent for a long time, studying her. The fire popped and crackled. Somewhere in the manor, a clock chimed 3 times. The witching hour. The new moon is in 4 days, he said finally, his voice resigned. The journey to the Whispering Wood takes 1. The glen is a day's hike from the edge. We would leave in 3 days. You will do exactly as I say. You will not wander. You will not touch anything. And if I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand? Lyra nodded, a strange mix of dread and determination settling in her stomach. She was agreeing to walk into the heart of his nightmare. Until then, he said, walking to the door, you will continue your shielding lessons with Kaelin, with more focus. The forest we must travel is called Whispering for a reason. It preys on unguarded minds. He paused at the threshold. And Lyra? Yes? Thank you. For the life debt. The words were stiff, formal, but they were sincere. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Lyra sank back into the chair, exhaustion finally claiming her. She was still wrapped in his shirt. The scent of him was everywhere. The bond was a quiet, steady thrum in her veins, no longer a foreign invader but a part of her landscape. She had gone from prisoner to patient to partner in the span of a single, bloody night. The unbinding ritual loomed ahead, a journey into a sorrow-soaked glen to pluck a flower of grief. Part of her hoped it would work, that this terrifying connection would be severed and she could somehow return to a normal life. But a deeper, more instinctual part, the part that had roared to life when he was in danger, trembled at the thought of that silver cord being cut. That part had felt, for the first time since arriving in this frozen hell, a sense of terrifying, inevitable purpose. The Crimson Sickle Moon had set. Its work was done. The bond was forged. Now, under the dark of the new moon, they would either break it or be broken by it.